Boom. We are back. Okay, so someone's nitpicking and telling me that, in case you missed it, I mean, I'm assuming that those who are watching the After Hour were watching the show on YouTube and Facebook and all that stuff. But someone's telling me that it is called now the Bell MTS Center. It's no longer, sorry, it's the Bell MTS Place. It's no longer the MTS Center. Ooh, it's very hard to keep up with all these name changes, you know? But I feel like you got the point, right?
Listen, the Russian judge is not happy, but everybody else is okay.
Oh my. All right. We got some questions. Let's answer them. What do you got?
Let's start with what we always start with, the question of the week as per Ariel Helwani.
Yes.
Considering all the factors, the player's voice interview, the lawsuit, etc., do you agree with the UFC's decision to remove Mark Hunt from UFC Sydney?
What do the people say?
I will drag up the numbers on that. What is your feeling on the situation? Do you feel that they acted in the best interest of Mark Hunt, of the UFC?
Okay, well, they definitely acted in the best interest of the UFC, and there is a strong case to be made that they acted in the best interest of Mark Hunt as well. I don't know if there's like a black and white right answer here. What I will say is this. Okay, so I'll say this. Let's just talk about what we know, like the facts, and then sort of the motives afterwards. So Mark Hunt does this interview with the player's voice, and it's really like a first-person account type of thing. It's like the Players Tribune. I didn't know that there was an Australian version of that, but this is kind of, it's like they're writing it, but obviously there's help involved. And in the article, he mentions, and it's really just like one paragraph, but he does mention how sometimes he slurs his words, he forgets things, but he says his body feels good and he's going to fight till he dies, etc. But these are, these are alarming sentences and not something you want to hear from an active fighter. I think that's safe to say. And so this piece comes out in September, and apparently, according to Mark Hunt and his manager, who I spoke to, they said that the UFC, they were troubled by it and asked him to undergo further testing. And he did. And according to both Mark Hunt and his manager, they passed whatever test they were asked to do. Now, I don't know the specific test, but that's what they said. So I took that information and went to the UFC and said, okay, this is what they're saying. Is that true? Did they pass the test you asked them to take? And if so, why was he removed from the fight against Marcin Tybura and replaced by Fabricio Verdum? I never heard back. And so I want to know if that's true, A. If he did pass tests that they asked him to take, why are they removing him from the fight? Now, let's forget about that. The comments are somewhat alarming, and we can't deny the fact or ignore the fact that Mark Hunt is involved in this lawsuit stemming from UFC 200. I do think that part of the decision comes from the fact that they're involved in this lawsuit, but for two reasons. A, they may not be on the best of terms. Maybe if they were on the best of terms, they wouldn't be so quick to remove him. But also B, Mark Hunt is involved in a lawsuit in which he's essentially saying that they were reckless towards him, right? Like he's saying that they let Brock Lesnar fight him. He's claiming while knowing that he was abusing PEDs. And so he has proven to be somewhat litigious, right? So he is saying that I'm going to take you to court because I believe, I'm going to sue you because I believe that you knew this and chose not to do anything about it. Well, isn't that the issue here too? He's putting it out there. If something were to happen, God forbid, 1,000,000 times, I mean, could he come back and say, look, I told you, I did an interview. Why didn't you stop me? And so they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. And so I agree with people who say that they made the right choice. I also understand people like myself who say, look, if you say that you passed it and you did and you made the guy take extra tests, why are you removing him from the card? I wish I had some kind of response to that. I don't yet, but I do think it was a tough call to make, and I can't hate on it because of the history, because of the lawsuit, because of what was said. If something were to happen, there's a precedent of him taking them to court and they have to cover their butt, right?
Yeah. I think ultimately they're backed into a corner and this was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot, and I feel for Mark, and I know he regrets it, and I'm surprised, honestly, that he did that kind of piece in the midst of a lawsuit, because I wonder if his lawyer would have wanted him to do that, because that's the crux of the issue right now.
Right.
But yeah, they were in a tough spot. I just want to know, if he did take those extra tests and did in fact pass him, what gave them pause? Why did they remove him ultimately?
Yeah.
So I think it's a developing story and not the last that we've heard of it. But I mean, back to the point. I mean, he's saying some pretty nasty things about Dana White. And to his credit, I don't miss the nasty Dana, but to his credit, he's taking the high road. He's not even going there with him. And he could go there if he wants to. Like, he's being insulting. He is being disrespectful.
Yeah, and almost being sympathetic to what he's saying.
100%.
Acknowledging what he's saying. 48% say that it was a correct decision. 52% said it was not. I think that's what I would expect, that it would be very
how many votes?
Close and split. 6,271 votes.
Okay.
Say ultimately no, they do not agree with the decision to remove Mark Hunt, but by a slim margin. Question number 2. Any news regarding the UFC's TV deal with Fox? Have there been any other potential suitors? Where do we stand with this?
Well, the exclusive negotiation period is up. It officially expires next December, and I'm so fascinated by the story. I can't get enough of this story. I'm so curious to see where the UFC lands, what kind of deal they get, how much is it worth. I mean, they were banking on something big when they sold the company for $4 billion, and when it was bought for $4 billion. And so I'm really curious to see if they land on Fox again, if it's an exclusive deal, if it's a splinter deal, if there's a player like an Amazon involved. I feel like there's a lot of things. If ESPN's involved, I feel like there's a lot of unknowns here. And so I think that this is going to be one of the most interesting stories to follow next year. Like, you know, at the end of the year when we do our story to watch for 2018, I already know mine. It's this, at least for me. Again, as I said earlier, the minutia, the business, pay-per-view buys, promotion, posters, all that stuff I'm fascinated by. And so there really isn't any news. I did hear that Amazon is interested in getting into the programming business, but I don't know to what degree. You know, I don't know if that's with the UFC and how would someone like an Amazon play when you have Fight Pass, right? I'm curious to see if they do less shows. I'm curious to see if they scale back. I think all those things are at play. Maybe less pay-per-views, more free fight cards. But to answer the question in a roundabout way, there's no real actual news.
I think you just touched on this now. Michael was asking any news on how many UFC events we can expect next year. As part of the TV deal, does it mean we get more pay-per-view and less free cards? Does it mean we get more free cards and less pay-per-view? But I suppose we'll have to see how this develops before we can really point to that.
Well, and also, just to be clear, next year is the same. So people have been saying like, oh, you should do fewer cards next year. Well, the cards up until the end of 2018 are already bought and paid for. Fox has asked for those cards. They've bought those cards. You know, like they have a set amount of cards that they have to deliver. So they can't get out of it unless they restructure the deal. They can't actually be like, all right, you know, we're going to do 25 fight cards this year because we want to. So next year is the same. It's the year after that. It's heading into 2019 and beyond that things may change.
After that, Ali Baisley is asking.
My man, Ollie.
Great dude.
Thank you for the Leicester City jersey or the kit.
The kit. Asking if we would see a reduction in pay-per-views.
I think that's possible.
And would that help Bellator? I guess the logic there being that if pay-per-views are down, then percentage of people getting pay-per-view money would be down, and therefore Bellator looks like an increasingly appealing option.
I mean, I think if they zig, you know, Bellator may zag. I think the Reebok deal has helped them to a degree. Certain things will help along the way. I don't know if a decrease in pay-per-view.
Yeah.
But I do think that decreasing the pay-per-view at this juncture might be a smart bet. I really think that everything's on the table at this point. But I would advocate for less shows. I do think that less is more. Quality over quantity. You know, I'm not the one who's, you know, in the, the meetings and on the business side of things, but from my seat, trying to make the cards as deep as possible, I would vouch for that.
Is Gegard Mousasi's legacy hurt by not having won UFC gold?
No.
Is having, you know, the Bellator title or the Strikeforce title, which he captured, enough?
Yeah, I think it's enough.
I agree. I think his legacy is pretty set.
I mean, look, people will remember how it kind of went and how things slowed down for him. And, unfortunately, he didn't get the title fight, but there's a little bit of politics involved there, and I don't view him any differently.
Bellator and UFC are both attempting to build a flyweight division. Who's more likely to go after Mackenzie Dern? Or too early to say?
Oh, no, the UFC. I've reported this in the past. They have her sort of in their training camp. You know, like one of those deals, not quite as lucrative as the Cyborg deal, but they're not giving her up. Whether or not she ends up fighting there, but you know, that remains to be seen. But yeah, I would be shocked if she went to Bellator over the UFC, at least right now, unless something changes.
Based on that Instagram post, I think we know the answer to this, but who do you think Conor is after? Does he want the money fight, which I imagine is Diaz, or do you think he wants to prove to be a worthy champ, which is Tony Ferguson?
I think both. Defend the title against the money fight. And that's the debate.
But does that prove that he's a worthy champ?
I mean, if he defends the title,
because that is not the number one contender or the interim champion.
I mean, that's the, you know, like that. He wants to defend the title. The big question is there a difference between, like how big of a gap is there pay-per-view buys wise between Conor Diaz and Conor Ferguson?
Is
it a gap of 1 million or is it a gap of like 250 at this point? Because Conor against you is 1 million, right? Conor against anyone. Conor against his flag is 1 million, right? Conor is just, you could bank on him getting 1 million, right?
Sure.
And so the question is, how big of a gap is there between?
Well, if you're going based on the last pay-per-view, the gap could be relatively large.
Yeah.
If you're going based on the reported numbers from this last pay-per-view, it may matter. Speaking of that,
yeah.
Do you think the fact that UFC 217 only did 125,000 pay-per-view buys hurts Tony's chances in getting that fight? Do you think that's something that can be pointed to as saying, not ready?
I think that a few factors were involved there. I do think that is, you know, a strike against him. And I think that he meant 216. That's what I was
right. 216, 217 is coming up.
Yep. I mean, it's a bit of a strike. There's been a lot going on. I think an interim title fight doesn't really do it for people. I think the UFC thinks that they could just slap a title fight on a fight and say, hey, you know, here's a title fight. I think people are a little smarter than that. I think that Kevin Lee isn't the biggest name right now. I think that he could very well be a star. And so I think that a few factors were at play here. It wasn't the deepest card of all time. But you could say it's a strike. I still think that him versus Tony does over 1 million. Now, remember I said that I thought that Nate versus Tony does 1 million as well. So the question is...
Is that still the case? Do you think that Nate has lost some shine?
I don't think he's lost some shine. I mean, he has to get back into it a little bit.
I would not imagine that Nate and Tony does 1 million.
You know, July, when I said that, it was around May. And it was after like our interview, and it still felt like there was a lot of buzz. But I really get the impression right now that people want to see the Tony Conor fight. I feel like that's the one that I get the most feedback about. And so, yeah, I don't know if that does 1 million at the moment, but I still think that Nate is a very, very, very big draw.
A needle mover, as they say.
Yeah. I mean, how much media he's going to do and all that, you know, there's a direct correlation there.
I think the answer to this is straightforward, but I'll ask you, do you think Bisbing is starting to annoy or get under the skin of GSP during the interviews and press conferences?
I'll say this about this fight. I really appreciate the fact that they are going the extra mile. Like, it's clear that they want to try to tell the people that this is a big deal. Now, whether all these interviews, you know, these, I should say, press conferences are getting the point across at how big of a deal it is to have GSP come back, I don't know if that's actually working. You know, like, I don't know if it's, we'll find out, you know, on November 4th and subsequent days. But they're trying. They sent them to Toronto. I like the fact that it was at the Hockey Hall of Fame, but in hindsight, I feel like they could have drawn a bigger crowd and had it come across via the internet that it was a big deal to the people of Canada, because I think they could only allow like less than 100 people in there. I thought it was awesome that they had them drop the puck at the Bell Center on Saturday night. And I don't know if you saw that clip. I'm shocked it wasn't in Rick's picks, quite frankly. I think that it was an anti-Canadian stance on your part. But did you hear the crowd?
I cannot confirm or deny the anti-Canadian stance.
Did you hear the crowd chanting GSP and the ovation that they gave him? It was phenomenal. People in Montreal still care. And it kind of made me feel like this fight should be happening in Montreal because it would have been an instant sellout. They're trying. Bisping is trying. I don't know if people feel like it's a fabricated feud. I don't know what it is, but Bisbing is trying. He's certainly trying. The thing about GSP when he gets close to a fight, like when he was retired, quote unquote retired, he was one of the most fascinating people in the sport. Like I would argue he was the best interview in the sport. He was unfiltered. He would talk about all kinds of cool things like unions and things like that. But now that he's like gearing up for a fight, it gets, he kind of like comes down to here and he doesn't really want to open up because he's getting into that zone. He's always been like that. So I'm really curious to see what the buy rate is.
Getting him out of that zone? Is he getting to him? I mean, I think clearly Bisbing's getting to him, in my opinion.
A little bit. I think a little bit.
I don't know if that will matter in the fight, but I think
Bisping has been phenomenal though. Like he has had to break out his.
Bisping is the best antagonist in MMA history.
He's just so great, and I love the fact that he owns it, that he enjoys it.
He will create friction where there is none, or none existed previously.
By the way, quick side note: speaking of GSP, I know most of our audience doesn't speak French, but Patrick Cote hosts a podcast. You can find it on his Twitter feed. I think it's called Uppercut MMA, and it's in French. But he had Christophe Midou on the podcast this past week, who is GSP's mentor. You'll recall heading into the Johnny Hendricks fight at UFC 163, it was Christophe who said that George was going to retire, and he ended up being correct. This interview is kind of shocking. Midou says that he recently watched, like this past week, watched GSP spar, said he didn't like what he saw, said he wasn't in favor of the comeback, said he won't be going to New York. Like he was very, very, very negative towards this whole experience. Said he didn't think that he should be fighting Bisping. Like this isn't just a pundit. This is GSP's mentor. Said that he sent him a long message about his thoughts. Now, some people associated told me after the fact that he's upset that he's not going to be in the corner. Freddie Roach is going to be in his corner this time, and maybe he got the boot. But to hear someone who's that close to GSP say that was kind of shocking. So if you do speak French, I highly recommend listening to Cote's podcast on a weekly basis. He does a great job with his co-host, whose name escapes me at this moment. I think it's JP. I highly recommend it. They have a great, take on things. But this particular interview, if you speak French, I highly recommend. Just to hear someone who is that close to GSP speak like that is somewhat mind-blowing.
People's main event for Dansk?
I think you got to go. I mean, Cerrone is kind of like that guy,
Ugh.
No?
You always go main event, people's main event all the time now.
Is that too?
Give me, dig deep. Give me something.
Is this not an indication, by the way, that the cards are a little top heavy? Okay, you want something? Well, I mean, okay, the next thing, in my mind, I was battling between it, but if you want something, if you're dying for something, and you're right, that's a cop-out. Anytime the Russian Hammer fights,
okay,
you got to give it to the GOAT.
Now we're talking.
You got to give it to the GOAT. The Russian Hammer, Artem Lobov, is back. He meets Andre Fili on Saturday. And what a great message he sent me earlier today. I checked in with him and asked him if Ophelia was going to get in the way of his traveling. And this is what he said to me. He said, "A hurricane will not stop the Russian Hammer. I will walk to my fight if I have to, ready to kill, prepared to die as always." I mean, what a guy. What a legend. So yes, Artem Lobov versus Andre Fili, your people's main event on Saturday in Dansk. But, I'm looking forward to Jody Escobel's UFC debut against Karolina Kowalkiewicz, Darren Till versus Donald Cerrone. There's a few things to get excited about there.
Boom Kelleher returns.
Yes, the man who said that he'd be listening to the podcast on his way to Poland.
There we go.
Yeah.
Boom.
Did you see that?
I did see that.
He tweeted me. He said...
Shout out to Brian.
Yeah, it's a big fight for him. Marcin Held, as I mentioned. Kelleher is fighting Damian Stasiak. Sam Alvey is on the card. Aspen Ladd, our pal Aspen Ladd, making her debut. She's supposed to debut back in July. She's fighting Lena Landsberg. Josh Emmett's on it. Jan Blachowicz. So there's some names. But yes, Artem Lobov, people's main event. Always. Lock.
If Colby Covington has a fantastic performance against Maia, do you see any way that he could leapfrog RDA and Lawler into the title picture?
No.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Be tough. UFC, if we had to make a USA versus the world fight card, who would be on that card? And I think inspired, obviously, sometimes this is seen in other sports. Would the USA team do well? Is a reasonable question.
Yeah, that is a reasonable question. One of my favorite UFC cards of all time was the USA versus Canada one, UFC 58.
Yeah.
That was awesome. And I love when they do sort of the gimmick cards, like the all heavyweight card, UFC 146, I believe it was. I love that stuff. Or maybe it was 160. It was one of those. I always get confused between those two. But because Cain Velasquez against Bigfoot Silva. I mean, can't go through the whole card, but yeah, I don't know if because I would have to say that I would favor the world. I mean, let's just look at the champions right now: Miocic, American; Cormier, American; Bisping, world. So there's one. Woodley, American; Conor, world; Holloway's American; Cody's American; DJ's American.
It's pretty good so far for champs.
For the Americans. Joanna is world. Amanda Nunes is world. We don't have 125 Chris Cyborg. So it's interesting how on the female side of things, it's more worldly than American. But I would love that. I would be all in. The more gimmicks, the better.
I like it.
A Ryzen, someone like that should do that. You remember when Bellator did US versus UK? I enjoyed that.
I do. Okay, we had a tweet about elaborating on one of your tweets. This was in regard to something you said about seeing something promotional.
That was the Aaron Bronstetter interview.
We
listen. I can't give it all. Alex. I can't give it all away for free.
You asked Ariel addressed what he.
And by the way, so he asked. I had mentioned that there was something that kind of blew me away promotionally. By the way, that's called promotion. What I did.
Wow.
You understand? Did I just blow your mind?
You just blew my mind. Have you ever watched the show Kingdom?
I have not.
An MMA journalist character that may have been inspired by you.
Okay, so I'll say this about the show. Jonathan Tucker, who is on the program, or I think the show's over, so was on the program, actually came up to me one time at an event when I was working for Fox and said, "We'd love for you to be in the show." And I was like, holy crap, that would be awesome. I've always felt like I had some acting chops in me. Sure, I would love to be a part of it. And then, of course, nothing came of it. Some people have sent me a tweet saying like, oh, there's a guy in Kingdom. I must admit, I've never seen it. This is the first time I'm seeing this fine gentleman. Have you seen the show?
I've not.
Do you think that this guy is inspired by me?
Basically? Maybe the former, afro.
Yeah, you got the afro, you got the facial hair. I mean, if I'm
the
being
plaid
honest,
shirt is the biggest homage, the biggest hat tip.
But I'm not a short sleeve plaid shirt guy.
Yeah, look, you can't replicate the exactly. Otherwise,
I feel like they tried to go super nerdy on me here, and quite frankly, if they
nailed it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a snap in the face.
I think I can't say that it was a bad decision to.
Long sleeve plaid, I can live with that. Short sleeve plaid, get out of here. GTFO.
The people are asking for a ringtone.
What?
Rick picked ringtone with you talking over it, stepping all over it, because that is the authentic version.
There you go. Make it happen.
So maybe we'll do that for charity next.
And by the way, watch all the proceeds just skyrocket afterwards.
And that is it for the questions.
Oh, I thought that there was one more.
Nope, that was it.
All right, that is it. Thank you very much for all the questions. Couple other things before we go. Again, Ally Quinta versus Paul Felder in Detroit. Love it or hate it?
Love. Love, love, love.
Who would have thought, right? Do you agree with me that they should have done Swanson Aldo instead of Ortega Swanson and done Swanson Aldo Ortega Lamas?
I like the way you arranged it, yes. A little bit better. Although I'm not mad at any of them. They're great fights.
RDA has been pushing for an interim belt being on the line against.
Absolutely not. Not in any circumstance, in any world, in any universe. Zero interest in seeing that for a bit.
I love the fact that he was like, everyone's talking about the interim title. Remember that? Did you see that tweet?
Nobody's talking about the interim.
I mean, Tyron Woodley, regardless of what you may think of him as a human being and fighter, he has been one of the most active champions in the UFC.
Wait, rewind. What do you mean by that? Like, regardless of what
you think of him. What are you talking about? Some people don't like him. Some people love him. Some people hate him. It doesn't matter. You can't deny the fact that he's one of the most active, if not the most active champion of the past year or so.
If you don't like Tyron Woodley, check yourself. That dude is...
Newsflash.
...is the man.
There are people who don't like every champion in the UFC, and Woodley's one of them. This is the first time you hear of this?
Not the first time I hear of it, but do something about this, people.
Okay. So yeah, no to that.
Definitely not.
Walt Harris versus Mark Godbeer has been Move to 217.
That's the right move.
That is the right move. Greg Hardy is making his amateur MMA debut on November 4th. You in or you out?
Yeah. It's hard for me to feel good about that one.
James Gallagher is out of his fight next month in Dublin. So
Fortunate, yeah.
Yeah. That's a bit of a bummer. He'll hopefully be back in 2018. Suffered a knee injury. So that is serious stuff. Jesse Taylor got a 1-year suspension from USADA. So that is an unfortunate ending to one of the best stories of the year. And Roger Gracie has announced his retirement. Favorite Roger Gracie moment?
Don't know. Couldn't tell you.
John Gotti III.
Wait, time out. What's yours?
Oh, I was just kind of running through the news here.
Yeah, sure. Tell me yours.
But wait, John Gotti III is going to be making his MMA.
I saw that. That's an interesting
MMA
one.
debut on October 27th for CES. By the way, I was walking down the streets of New York maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, and John Gotti III got out of a taxi and came up to me and was like, "Hey, Ariel, I'm John Gotti III. I'm going to be making my MMA debut. You're going to remember me. You're going to be talking to me one day."
Damn.
And I was like, "What? John Gotti?"
That's great.
I didn't even know that he was actually like a fighter.
I also love how he comes straight out of the car with, "I'm John Gotti III.
Heck
You're
yeah.
gonna remember me."
So that's to come. Roger Gracie, I'll go with his win over Kevin Randleman, the late great Kevin Randleman in St. Louis for Strikeforce.
Wow. Well done.
How about that?
Picked one right off Wikipedia.
Boom. I was there. You liar. You should apologize. And that is that. That is Roger Gracie. All right, we are done. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you in the back. Thanks to everyone at home. It's time to go home. It's time to call it a day. What a fun show it has been. What a fun afternoon it has been talking a little mixed martial arts with all of you. And so, like I said at the top, a relatively quiet week in the world of MMA, but that all changes this weekend. Bellator is back, and you can make a strong case that their main event, featuring Gegard Mousasi and Alexander Shlemenko, is the most intriguing fight of the weekend. I think top to bottom, the UFC card is a little better, but can't wait to see Gegard Mousasi debut for Bellator and see how he looks and see if he can have the kind of performance that Rory McDonald did in his debut, get some momentum, fight for the belt, and we'll see what happens there. I think that there's a lot riding on that fight for Bellator, and I'm curious to see how Mr. Mousasi responds. Really enjoyed having him in studio, by the way. Not often that he's around these parts, so that was really cool. I appreciate him and his team, and of course Bellator for hooking us up. Thank you very much to Karolina Kowalkiewicz. A lot of fun to talk to her. I know she's a little short on words at times, but I thought it was cool having her on the program, and I wish her the best against Jody Escobel. Thank you very much to Mark Goddard. Keep up the great work, my friend. Thank you very much to Henry Cejudo. What a crazy story that was. So glad to hear that he is okay, that he is feeling okay, that he survived the fires last week in California. Thank you very much to Derek Lewis. Get well soon. Thank you for coming on. Get well soon to Kevin Lee. Appreciate his time as well. Again, as I said, thank you very much to Gegard Mousasi. Mazel tov to Juliana Pena and her fiance. And thank you very much to the one and only Khabib Nurmagomedov for stopping by. Great to see him back as well. Back next week, same time and place. Until I say peace. Somebody.